it was enough for the Cheyenne to go, oh, shit. So...
Wait, that one killed? Man, the bar is non-existent for these people. All he said was, oh shit, in a racist accent. Funny sounds are funny.
Heard the term tribal? You've heard that term? Like after the Holocaust, there being 60 million more Jews than before.
I assume that was a joke. I assume that was a joke. I assume that wasn't, like, implying... Come on.
Something else, too. And I know some of you are going to get mad, and I don't care. Because you're going to tell me that you're 1/16th Apache. Shut up.
They're already mad.
Yeah, I don't care.
Yeah,
Look, no one is justifying Trail of Tears. There were horrible acts committed.
I feel like a butt's coming
up. But look, here's the thing.
Yep,
the Native American trump card is one of those sacred cows. It's one of those third rails that nobody wants to touch. And boy, does it grind my gears. This idea that for some reason land should be given back to some common ancestral existence where people were all living in harmony. Do you know, we had one civil war here in the New World, and it was really bad and bloody. Yeah. Before the New World, it was always civil war. Speaking to her captivated audience on Instagram, AOC shared her feelings about her reawakening to her Native American roots, heritage, and then proceeds to make a bunch of claims which are just laughable.
I really, really feel you and understand you on this. In fact, I feel like one of the things that first started awakening and connecting me in a deep way to my Indigenous heritage was connecting with the Lakota Sioux in Standing. When I was at Standing Rock,
I couldn't hear what she was saying because of your super, super funny jokes. Chill.
It really just clicked that this is us, like, and the grace that they extended to say, no, you are relative, was really formative for me. And while we may not be and come from the same exact lineage, there is a commonality to that ancestry, and it's important for us to recognize that we were raised and we were told growing up that we were extinct, that Tainos don't exist. And it's really important for Puerto Ricans to understand that that narrative is being challenged right now.
So there are a few things, and we'll get to that, by the way.
Wait, AOC is part Indigenous? This is being reported almost exclusively in right-wing outlets. Don't want to go to the Daily Mail. Don't want to go to Fox News. New York Post. What's Diversity Inc.? This one could go one of two ways. It looks more like a blog, though. Conversations around race and ethnicity have been prominent in the media because of the onslaught of diverse, newly elected public officials. AOC is one of them. It's no secret that throughout the Latino community, there are three major racial influences: African, European, and Indigenous. And depending on the person's country of origin, it has been well established one of these influences can be dominant or they can be equal. She is Nuyorican, a person of Puerto Rican descent, born and raised in New York. Okay. In the interview, she talked about her heritage, citing my identity is the descendant of many different identities. I'm the descendant of African slaves. I'm the descendant of indigenous people. I'm the descendant of Spanish colonizers. I'm the descendant of all sorts of folks. That doesn't mean I'm black. That doesn't mean I'm native, but I can tell you the story of my ancestors. That seems very uncontroversial for a statement. All right, here we go.
She's talking about these people from Puerto Rico who I believe traveled from Venezuela. But by the way, you understand the reason that you were taught that they were extinct is because of leftist indoctrination. They tried to push this false narrative of a genocide, which never happened. We'll get to that. But first, let's get...
I think she's a dinosaur.
Yep,
yes.
By the way, she's one of them, but she's extinct. I'm confused. And we don't exist, honey. We are extinct. But what about us? That doesn't matter.
Well, I wouldn't mind her being extinct. She'd come up as oil, and then it's like, you know, it's perfect. It's all
it just starts off really poorly.
I was surrounded in liquor bottles.
So...
When did the joke start? I feel like you just did like 6 in a row. But it's basically like, what if like Andrew Dice Clay was way more racist and then just said observational things based on what we're talking about, and then you just go in circles and do that over and over again?
She, let's go to the first claim. Okay, so the first claim is she refers, well, just listen to what she says. She refers to them as Lakota Sioux.
I really, really feel you and understand you on this. In fact, I feel like one of the things that first started awakening and connecting me in a deep way to my Indigenous heritage was connecting with the Lakota Sioux in Standing.
All right, truth. Everyone go to AOC's Twitter. I believe it's at AOC.
At AOC or at Google.
And let her know that she needs to apologize because the term Sioux is considered derogatory by many of the Lakota people, just to be clear. So she doesn't even have the self-awareness to be concerned about that.
This is called concern trolling, when you don't care about something at all, but you want to say that you're really concerned about it. And then, yeah, fun stuff. Go brigade AOC based on my show right now, and then tell her how racist she is right now. And again, it's not something that Steven Crowder gives two fuck about. He's incredibly racist towards Indigenous people, but likes doing the outrage.
Oh yeah, the bitch.
The term Nadasu was
How is that a debunk of what she said out loud, by the way? It's like claim truth. All right, let's move on to claim.
Surrounded by Native people, it really just clicked that this is us. Like, and while we may not be and come from the same exact lineage, there is a commonality to that ancestry.
And by the way, when she says not the same exact, she means at all. So now, if you want to get technical about it, and here's the thing, it's just sort of like where we have the left wants to tell you, for example, with slavery, that, well, you're not really teaching American history. Well, hold on a second. No. We believe that you should teach American history, as it starts in American history. They go, oh, you should teach about the history of the slave. Okay, well, then hold on a second. Now it's a matter of how far back we go, because the slave trade existed before and it exists now.
What a weird fucking sentiment. Do you want to live in a world where just American exceptionalism, perfection, if you will, that's the beginning? So why not just start with Reagan? Why not start your history at Reagan and nothing came before it? Do kind of like that Bible thing, like the earth is only 5,000 years old. Do that. All of life started in the 1980s. Then that's the glory of America.
Now, so we say if you're going to teach kids about slavery, you need to teach them about the West African slave trade. You need to teach them that over 90% of slaves were sold; they were not stolen. You need to teach them where slavery originated. You go, no. Well, you just want to cut it off to make it seem like America is the only place.
Hey, I say teach all of it. Why not? I say it's kind of weird that you want to use this as a device to try and claim that, or maybe do apologia for slavery itself. That is something that white supremacists do. I've seen that tactic done a lot online, where someone will come at you and like, yeah, but did you know who actually sold a lot of the people their slaves? Did you know they were sold by black people? And you're like, yeah, that doesn't discount the slavery? But sure, yeah, all right.
That had slavery. Same thing if we're talking about common ancestry. I know what she means to say. She's talking about Native American tribes, and she wants you to think that they were all living together in peace, I guess is what she wants you to believe, that we all share some commonality.
It's a very weird leap. That's massive. Like fucking, I'm surprised he didn't break his legs on that one.
Yeah.
That's not true. Now, it is true that all human beings, if you again change the degree, have a common ancestry, according to scientific.
That's part of the whole weird noble savage mythologizing. It goes in both directions, right? Conservatives like to be in one direction where it's like, hey, by the way, did you know that like Native Americans were literally cannibals and they were killing each other and they were just constantly killing each other? It's a surprise that any of them survived. And then the other direction, you'll get the liberal version of it, where it's just like they were all constantly living in peace and harmony with each other. They had no disease. They had nothing wrong. There was absolutely no war. They're both in both directions wrong. They're like any other group, all right? They're not a monolith, first off, and there's obviously going to be a variety of different things that have happened, like most of humanity.
Like American, you reach a date where family trees share not just one ancestor in common, but pretty much every ancestor in common. And this is really going to piss off AOC, but beginning in 1492, you begin to see the European genes flowing in every direction until estimates are that there are no people in South America today who don't have European ancestry.
How dare you, Stephen?
Why would that piss her off? Do you think people on the left think that like European genes or white people genes is evil somehow? Or like, oh God, no, the sin of white. I must keep that white away from me. I am pure. I'm a pure non-white person. You have to, I guess, always think in terms of like ethno-nationalism or something. Don't let her know this, but she's actually probably got a little bit of European ancestry. Oh no, that's the worst possible thing anyone could ever hear. You have to be a pure unwhite. No shit.
They talk about Yemaya, oh,
Shut up.
Yemaya. That is Yoruba.
Oh my god. What? Just let the world burn.
Yeah.
I quit.
What's the point? She's a drawing, right? Like those eyes, that's anime.
Yeah, you would think, yeah.
They're getting bigger.
It's like that Steve Odenkirk was the Thumb show.
Yeah.
I think that one was supposed to be an insult, but that seems like it's a little bit more telling about maybe his search history.
4 miles away from the alleged bomb that was going. The point is she lies about everything.
Well,
You didn't use my pronouns, bro.
my good friend Justin's.
Yeah, and that very small subset. Right. here's a claim that she talks about Standing Rock. Okay, and this is something that look, we're dealing with the Native American sort of culture here. And she uses the term Indigenous, which I believe you're not supposed to use in that video, but I don't know.
No.
The point is, we learned Indigenous in Canada, and then I came here, people told me it was offensive, you're supposed to say Native American, they still say Indigenous in Australia. I don't care. I'm just...
Why not just say what people want to be called by? I don't get why this one's so hard. If you laid it all out. You already know. You've already learned. The work is over. You're like, well, and I traveled here, and then apparently the proper thing to say here is Native American. It's like, okay, fine. So say Native American if you're referring to Native Americans. You can say Indigenous people if you're referring to Indigenous people in Canada. That's, broadly speaking, not going to be a very hard thing for you. Like I said, you've already learned it. You don't have to do any work. This one's free. And I like how you can just put like something on if you put the word, what is it? Claim. So if I go like this. So, he claims that he had to learn a new thing, and that was troubling for him. Okay. But you've learned it. It's over. So the truth, and I don't have the graphic for that because I can't afford it. The truth in this matter is that why the fuck does it bother you so much? Genuinely. I mean, it's the same thing with, like, I can see this expanding over to pronouns, being like, you know, well, why do I have to use they, them? I never use they, them. It doesn't make any sense to me. Except when I pick up the phone.
Just pointing out the hypocrisy that they can never live up to their own rules, and it's hysterical. So she was talking about Standing Rock. Okay, this is when I was growing up, remember you probably learned Black Hills. This is a big thing, right? Talking about this is in Dakota. I don't know if Black Hills, this whole area goes across both Dakotas. I'm not entirely sure, but Black Hills, let's just say Dakota. Not the Lakota, which she refers to as the Sioux. Yes. They were demanding when I was growing up that the Black Hills be given back, right? And
I love that he's like, oh, by the way, everybody tweeted AOC that this is a slur I'm now going to use so much because hell yeah, one more for the Rolodex that I know won't get me in trouble.
We were all standing together. Okay, here's the thing. Do we have that? We don't have that as a clip, do we?
No, I think that was the previous one.
Yeah. Okay. So here's the truth with that. When they talk about handing it back because we were all standing together.
Oh shit! Bam!
Let me frame the truth in the form of a question. Let's Jeopardy this. Which tribe? So they want you right now, like we're all holding hands together. We're all unified. You were never unified until the evil white man came. You were all killing each other. Which tribe? There's so many tribes.
Okay, so here's how colonialism works, especially settler colonialism specifically. So white people did do that. They arrived. The Europeans did, actually. It's probably more accurate to use Europeans. Europeans arrived. They brought with them disease, and I'm sure you're going to bring this up. The disease is responsible in large part for the death of the vast majority of indigenous people while they were actively enslaving them and also actively trying to commit genocide against different groups. So, I mean, if you want to say the disease that they brought over also aided the projects that were undergoing, I guess it's just ordained by God then in that viewpoint. But here's the thing. When you took all these different tribes and you forced them to all live in the same plots of land known as reservations, which obviously experienced huge amounts of poverty, you combined a bunch of different cultures. You're not wrong about that. Different cultures, languages, beliefs, all that kind of stuff. And now you've created a dynamic where you are the oppressor. So they would unite in their oppression against you. That's the dynamic that's been set up. Now, there would be things like treaties that are signed, perhaps, at different periods in time, especially when they had more negotiating power, especially when perhaps they needed help. I'm talking about colonizers to get through different areas of the Americas. And during that time, they would need assistance. So they would be like, okay, fine, we're going to sign a peace treaty. So we stop warring with each other as well. We're going to allow you to have sovereign control over this amount of land. And then guess what? They didn't disappear. That's the whole point. They didn't cease to exist. Neither the treaties nor the individuals, even if it is the descendants of those individuals, because I'm pretty sure you understand this concept if you talk about America, that if you were born in America, it suddenly doesn't become a thing where it's like, well, what? It's like another generation is supposed to claim that they have powers as Americans here? Is that how this works? Like, people have kids, generations continue, as does the nation state, the concept of America. Now, they didn't have nation states in the same ways that you do now. I mean, that was definitely a colonial project. But once they recognized what was happening, yes, of course, they signed treaties to be able to have sovereign control over areas which they saw as going to be their land. That was agreed upon. The treaties were broken. Doesn't mean that if those people still exist, that these things shouldn't be honored. That's kind of the basis for land back.
Have been in charge of the Black Hills over the course of what we have recorded, 10,000 years. right? You had the HARASSMENT, you had the Sanish. I don't know if I'm pronouncing this correctly. Resided there.
Yeah, of course. So what? What does this have to do with anything?
Long before the Sioux, as far as back as 900 AD. Dakota took the Black Hills, right? It took them during, I believe it was the late 1700s and the early 1800s. Why? Well, how? They outnumbered the Cheyenne.
Yeah.
So they took their shit, just to be clear. So you have the Kiowa, then you have the Cheyenne. So who do you give it back to? Do you give it back to the original tribe or the people who evicted that tribe or the people? We didn't invent evictions. We were just able to sign the notice in a singular language. That's all. We didn't create evictions. And at least we give a warning. They just said, we have more people than you. Therefore, leave.
There it is. I was like, he hasn't done a racist impression of an indigenous person, but you got it. He was saving this one, you know, and now he's excited.
Or get raped. I'm like, I guess we'll leave. Good choice.
Did you give them reservations, by the way? Did you give them land to go over and hang out on? Like, we want this land, but we'll give you some other land? No.
Yeah, and by the way, the Lakota beat the Cheyenne at that point. Do you know how? By outnumbering them. It depends where you go in the estimates. Back then it was considered a lot if there were like 17,000 to 20,000 right there in that area of the Black Hills. It was enough for the Cheyenne to go, oh, shit. So...
Wait, that one killed? Man, the bar is non-existent for these people. All he said was, oh, shit, in a racist accent. Funny sounds are funny.
You've heard the term tribal? You've heard that term? There you go. So here's another claim that they make.
My tattoo knows that term.
Here's another claim that they make, that the natives were it was a genocide. They were genocided.
Right.
Again, I told you how many Lakota there were in Black Hills back then. Do you know how many there are today? Registered. That doesn't include the fakes who want to tell you at every dinner party that they're one portion asshole.
Oh, here we go.
That's the portion that's not Native American, by the way.
Right,
Yeah. The portion that's Native American is the only redeeming portion of those people.
Yeah,
Holy
I'm
fuck, this takes so long.
70,000 registered Lakota Indians in the United States. So here's the truth, okay? The truth is, we genocided, and I know that's not really a term, but I'm just using it.
Yeah.
We genocided the Native Americans. There are more Native Americans than ever. Well, then we screwed up.
Yes.
What the fuck are you talking about? Conservative estimates put it anywhere between like 10 to 80 million people. And I know that those are not all going to be Lakota, but holy shit, 70,000? That's absolutely absurd. That's fundamentally absurd.
Like after the Holocaust, there being 60 million more Jews than before.
I assume that was a joke. I assume that was a joke. I assume that wasn't like implying, come on.
They're just bad at their job.
Genocide typically means wiping people out.
Yeah.
There are approximately the numbers, and it's tough to get a...
Yeah, that doesn't discount the Holocaust. What the fuck are you talking about right now?
An official count. I don't know if you know this. The natives, all the tribes, didn't necessarily cooperate in a census. Try going banging teepee to teepee, taking your life in your hands.
They don't answer, and you're like, I know you're in there. I can hear you.
Right.
You're right. You're like 3 feet from me.
There's a fire.
Leave it on the teepee step and get the hell out of here.
I just don't fucking know how people sit through this. Jesus Christ. It's a mix of being so fucking historically inaccurate, factually inaccurate, racist as fuck, but like the highest crime of all, I suppose. Deeply unfunny for a comedian. Like every single joke. And don't worry, I'm not being serious there. It's obviously really bad about the racism and all the historical and factual inaccuracies.
Everywhere. We don't have to take the Staten Island Ferry. Right now, homeowner. And then you came back to plumbing. You got rid of the linoleum, replaced it with granite. So we're going to live here now. And you said you can't do that. Only back then there was no police. There was nothing else to do. You would be like, now I have to kill all of you.
So stupid.
Wait, you wouldn't do that today?
That kind of stuff happened all the time back then. They didn't.
Yeah.
Certain tribes didn't have a concept of personal property, so there was a lot of trading that took place, and then there were also battles that took place, but not nearly as brutal as Native Americans were with each other. And I hate even using that term because it's a BS term. That's another claim that they make. The natives are native. Again, no. The Taino people where she's talking about, we all share a common ancestry. So she's talking about the Taino, however she says it. I don't know why I said it with a Chinese accent.
Taino.
Yeah, she did too.
Holy shit, his racism's malfunctioning. Can't compute racism, must spew all of it simultaneously. All right, let's look up some horrific facts about Native American genocide. The killing of millions of people. Millions of indigenous people were murdered in an effort to depopulate the virgin wastelands settlers found when they first arrived in the New World. For a long time, it was thought that only 1 million inhabitants were present when the Europeans first arrived. However, today it is estimated that a pre-contact population of Native Americans was likely between 9 and 18 million. By that later part of the 19th century, this indigenous population was reduced to the numbers of approximately 250,000. This is an elimination of 98 to 99% of the total Native American present. Today, it is estimated that there are 2 to 3 million people on Earth who identify as being Native American. Some of the most most well-known examples of this outright slaughter and murder include the 1890 massacre of more than 300 Lakota at Wounded Knee in South Dakota, and the 1864 massacre of more than 250 Arapaho and Cheyenne Sand Creek in Colorado, when holding a religious ritual referred to as a ghost dance. However, since the U.S. government was frightened and unfamiliar with these practices, they sent in troops and shot down more than 300 Lakota, many of which were women and children. The bodies of those who were murdered were stripped down and thrown into a pit. During the 100th anniversary of this event, the Lakota descendants dressed as their ancestors do and took a 250-mile trek to those who were trying to escape the mass assassination that followed. When it comes to the mental and bodily harm of Native American people, no other action was quite as devastating as the effect of alcohol. It is something that has led to the situation where alcoholism, accidental death, homicide rates, suicide, and unemployment are still very high than the national average for Native Americans. The majority of studies available regarding the subject of alcoholism in the Native American communities, even ones done as late 1980s, don't mention that these issues are all directly related to the policies set by the United States government for Native people. In fact, alcohol was a prominent part of the invasion by the Europeans into North America, and it constituted an especially versatile weapon for the invaders. In reference to the Indian Health Service report of 1987, as late as 1984, the deaths related to alcohol in Native populations in the U.S. was 4.8 times higher than those amongst all other races. Also, in addition to the number of deaths that were due directly to the diseases resulting from alcoholism, the use of alcohol is considered a main contributing factor in homicides, suicides, unintentional and intentional injuries, and mental health issues of the indigenous people of North America. This means that alcohol not only helped reduce the population of Native Americans when the New World was first discovered, but it also still affects communities all over the U.S. to this day, causing many disorders and deaths in this race. One of the best examples of eradicating the Native American population is seen with the Indian removal. Andrew Jackson signed the Indian Removal Act into law in 1830 after gold had been discovered in Georgia. This was home to the Cherokee Nation. After gold was discovered, the U.S. government wanted to control the land, which ultimately led to the Death March, which is commonly referred to as the Trail of Tears in history books. This act decreed that the so-called 5 civilized tribes, which included the Seminole, the Creek, Chickasaw, Choctaw, and Cherokee Indians, had to leave their homelands. However, they were being forcibly removed and herded to the west. This is when western of the frontier became known as Indian Territory. Thousands of these people were sent to concentration camps, and then they were bound in chains and marched with bayonets pointing at them with their new homelands. This was located west to the Mississippi. While there were 17,000 Cherokee removed, only 8,000 were able to survive the horrific conditions on the path to their new home. Many died of disease and malnutrition. The Choctaw people lost 6,000 of their 40,000 population, and the mortality rate for both Seminoles and Creeks was around 50%. All throughout the country, similar actions took place with Native populations just being herded into reservations during this removal period. Jackson promised the Indians peace, but this only lasted 50 years until the General Atonement Act was passed. The General Atonement Act came into effect 50 years after the Trail of Tears, when the Indians were relocated to another part of their country. When the Indians were originally moved to their homes, the president at the time, Andrew Jackson, promised them that they would stay in their location where the white people would not bother them and that they would not have any claim to the land. He also promised the indigenous people could live in plenty and peace and the land would remain theirs forever. However, the General Atonement Act was put into effect. It destroyed what remained of the indigenous land base. Individual tribe members had been promised the land that had been allotted to them for their heirs without fail. However, due to inflicted conditions, they said they were brought about physical destruction of the land, and the new act took the land from the Indians, leaving them nowhere to go, and the lands were soon sold to non-natives. Even today, there are many Native people who struggle to try and regain ownership and control of their lands that were seized by the U.S. government under these policies. Many people claim that it is because these types of acts that many Native Americans still live below the poverty line today. They're not issues that are quickly resolved for the people either. Within the U.S. government, it still desires to hold the land that they deem to be theirs, not the indigenous people. Involuntary sterilization of American Indian women. The U.S. government has had a hand in virtually all aspects of Native American life. This includes healthcare issues amongst the indigenous population. This began in the 1800s. At this time, the War Department's Army physicians were worried about the increasing number of incidents of contagious diseases such as smallpox among natives who were living in nearby military posts. Eventually, what evolved out of this concern was what was referred to as the Indian Health Services, or the IHS. One of the main roles of the department was the involuntary sterilization of American Indian women. In fact, according to reports at the time, between the dates of 1970 and 1976, between 25 and 50% of all American Indian women were sterilized. 25 and 50%. The vast majority of these women never gave their informed consent or were manipulated into giving consent. This was extracted from them with treats that they would lose their benefits if they did not undergo the operation. This is an atrocity that happened is what is considered civilized times for the quote white man. The operations were used for the sterilization process were crude that often resulted in the women developing infections and other complications from the surgery. There are many who even died while undergoing the procedure. The ultimate goal was of the US government trying to minimize the population to try and control the outbreak and spread of the infectious diseases that the Europeans had brought with them to the New World. The creation of Indian boarding schools, During the latter portion of the 1800s and 1900s, there was a new type of Indian removal utilized. This was the movement used to try and civilize or assimilate the remaining population of Native Americans. It was during this time that various Indian boarding schools were created. At these schools, the Indian children had to follow strict, almost military-style discipline. The schools also prohibited the children from speaking their native languages and from practicing their religion. Basically, the residential school system of Canada and all the horrors. It's the Indian boarding schools in the US. They were not even allowed to visit their families. To ensure that all Indian children entered these schools, Indian agents traveled from one home to the next on reservations and gathered children as young as the age of 5. They removed the children from their homes and placed them in boarding schools. Modified types of this practice continued for decades, including in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. Many of the children were ultimately removed from their parents' homes and put into white foster homes. The reason for this was to try and improve the current economic conditions. From the years 1958 to 1967, both private and public agencies in the US promoted the practice of white families adopting Indian kids. In response to these type of practices, the leaders of various tribes worked to enact the Indian Child Welfare Act, which prevented the involuntary termination of a Native American's parent rights. The government controls all economic development on Indian land. Any and all development projects on Native American land has to undergo a review period and receive authorization from the government. This is a process that is notoriously long and tedious. On Indian land, the business or company has to go through at least 4 different federal agencies, 49 individual steps to acquire a permit of any type for energy development. Off the reservation, this is accomplished in just 4 steps. This type of bureaucracy helps to prevent tribes from being able to capitalize on the resources they have. The fact is, many Native Americans have to wait for years to pass prior or receiving needed approvals when it comes to energy development on Indian-owned lands. This is a process that only takes a few months on private land. At any point, the agency has the option to demand more information or to shut the development down altogether. There are some Native Americans that have waited more than 6 years and received title research report that other people in America can acquire in only a few days. The control of the Americas Indian population began before the Americas moved in. In fact, during that time, the French and Indian War, the British delivered blankets to the Indians that had been infected by smallpox. This event occurred in 1763, before the U.S. was even formed. After the French and Indian War, the Native Americans were no longer being ruled by the French, with whom they had become comfortable, and were now under British rule. The Native Americans hated the deal they received from the British since they treated the Indians so badly. The goal of this was to restore rule to the French, but in the end, they wanted freedom. However, since freedom wasn't an option and the British gained control, they took action. They began to raid settlements, schools, towns, killing every white person they could find. This is what referred to as the Pontiac Rebellion. At the time, Lord Jeffrey Amherst concocted the idea to give Indians the blankets that were infected with smallpox. Due to the blankets and the widespread nature of the disease, thousands of Indians became ill and died. This included many women and children. After this, the Indians also became so dependent on them for pellets and gunpowder, which is something they ran out of quickly when hostility arose. There's still 2 more. By the time the 20th century arrived, many Native American people were forcibly removed from their homeland and put onto reservations. In 1867, the Medicine Lodge Treaty was created. This appeared to provide tribes with some say in what occurred regarding the lands that they had been forced to move on to. The treaty stated that in order for reservation land to begin being used by other purposes, 75% majority approval was required by the tribe currently living on the land. However, in the 1900s, the government made a decision to parcel the land off what was previously given to the Kiowa Comanche tribe. The individuals who accepted a certain plot of land were also given official citizenship. The additional land was also parceled off and sold to anyone who wanted to buy it. However, no approval was sought or given. As a result, leader of the Kiowa tribe, Lone Wolf, filed a lawsuit against the government for the breach of the treaty, but he was unsuccessful. According to the verdict handed down, Congress had the right to change any prior treaties they needed because the government retained control over everything that happened on a reservation in the U.S. Man, land back is going to be so much harder in the U.S. While the case went all the way up to the Supreme Court, the verdict did not falter. As a result, the members of the tribe were considered wards of the nation. Wards of the nation. Not long after this occurred, more than 50,000 settlers moved into what was considered surplus land on the reservation. The verdict still has not been overturned today and is a valid and active precedent. Great. Great. And finally, Alcatraz was originally discovered by Spanish and Portuguese in the 1540s. However, it had been inhabited for more than 10,000 years. When the Spanish came into the area, there were approximately 10,000 people living in the Bay Area. According to the tradition, the island was long used for the same reasons it was down the road, isolating individuals who broke laws. In 1894, the Hopi were in the midst of a rebellion against various government regulations that had been placed on them. They stated that they had to send their children away from their homes to attend the government-run schools. In an effort to force the parents to send the children away, it was suggested that law enforcement and the military members go and arrest anyone who did not send their kids. When snows and other bad weather conditions made that impossible, the government interrupted the supply of food and goods. However, many still refused to send their children, and as a result, 18 tribal leaders were arrested and had to face a trial. When found guilty, which they all were, they were sent to Alcatraz. Who's left behind still didn't comply, and those arrested were released a year later. At that point, they continued peaceful protests against the educational restrictions. There is no question that the US government has always had somewhat of an uncomfortable relationship, that's one way of putting it, with individuals who lived to the lands prior to the European settlers. While this relationship has improved over time, there's still quite a long way to go and much to make up for. There's no question that in the last century there's been amazingly large amounts of horror experienced by native tribes in America. While many people automatically think about the Holocaust when thinking about genocide, there's one just as bad that occurred on US soil, the genocide of Native Americans. While the steps were taken were not immediate, they affected this population nonetheless, and as a result the number of Native Americans in the US fell significantly, and the losses have not been made up for. From boarding schools, involuntary sterilization, and mass murder, these people had to live through horrific pasts that no person ever wants to face. Better understanding that went on can help ensure these types of atrocities don't occur again. That's also very true. So when it comes to this fucking team of racist assholes trying to, do history revisionism, being like, well, at the end of the day, that they were violent towards each other. They warred. We weren't the only ones. Come on, it's not just us. They killed each other too. I mean, that's documented at the end. So, Do you enjoy the Serfs but prefer not to have to use your eyeballs? Many are saying this. Well, we've got the solution for you. It's the Serf Times in podcast form, available on most major podcasting networks now. If you enjoy it, please consider leaving a good review and feedback because it really helps the show out, apparently, and it's free, just like the podcast.
To our gods, Xander Corvus and Peyton L. Just, we are prepared to embark on a mighty jihad in your name. To our monarch, Tom Spiker, we are but your humble jester, attempting in vain to get you to laugh. To our valiant knights of the Round Table, Benji Arnie, Tech Tink, Scary Earth Human, Tony, DM Rivera, Resident Scarecrow, Sir Nickus, Mayred, Cheryl Alvarez, Ruby Kelly, Brandon, Words Greenwood. It doesn't matter what I believe, it only matters what I can prove. Egbert Celine, Matthew Scarborough, Stellar Vision, Ariane McCarthy, Daniel Sutton, Coulter Smith, Jenna Tao, Quiet 185, Anna Loves Riley, Omni, Riley and Anna, Poodlehawk, The Tim Caucus, Multimondi, Trevbot, EXE, Brian Ephraim, Lemmy 101, Anthropophojak, Saren 42, Catherine, Ramon Acosta, Incosin, Agent NDN, Violent Orchard, Political Puppy, La Media Panza, Zach Christensen, Todd Buckingham, and Todd Lajeunesse. We raise our mugs and salute our brave heroes off to another glorious conquest.